Welcome to the first session of What Are You Talking About? It's hosted by Real Utopia. For more information on Real Utopia, go to realutopia.org. We'll begin this session with a short explanation about the 20 Thesis, what it is, the origins, the current status, and then we'll move on to questions and answers. So if Michael wants to begin with our discussion about the origins or a little explanation.
Sure. Hello all. I tried to think of a sort of a dramatic way to do this. I don't know how dramatic it is, but suppose you were to wake up and see hundreds, or in fact, even thousands of progressive, radical, revolutionary projects, campaigns, organizations, and movements spread all over the planet, from small ones in little neighborhoods to larger ones in states or countries, and even global ones, from ones in a single workplace to a whole industry to an economy, from ones in local government up to full-scale government, and about all kinds of agendas and topics, about race and racism, about immigration, about police violence, about gender and kinship and sexual preferences, and about participation and democracy and fascism, fighting fascism, and about income and wealth. Suppose you saw all that. Well, you might realize that that isn't just today, but it was there yesterday, last year, and for decades that has existed. And so you may wonder, why does that bubbling, courageous, insightful, energetic mass of creative, concerned, activist components of struggle not have more power? Why hasn't it won more? And so you might think, okay, what blocks the potential of all of that diversity and energy from moving together to become a really more impactful movement of movements? And you might think one obstacle, not the only obstacle, but one important obstacle, is that across all those components that exist, there is insufficient shared vision and insufficient shared strategy to have the whole mass of components see itself not only as each individual component, but as one large, diverse whole. There's not enough vision and strategy to sustain the trust and the caring that would be needed to generate the kind of solidarity, to generate the kind of mutual aid that a real movement of movements would entail. And so if you got to that point, you might think, okay, how about if we propose some observations, ideas, hopes, call it theses, that could perhaps prod and inspire that wide array of efforts to engage with one another and together arrive at the needed level of shared vision and strategy. Not a blueprint, not a one-size-fits-all specific, all-encompassing vision and strategy, but at just enough essentials to sustain the needed solidarity and trust. So you have in mind not a straitjacket of fixed views, not a timeless document, but a living document of evolving views meant to inspire ongoing solidarity and meant to change in light of not just the insights of each of those separate components, hundreds and thousands ultimately, but especially in light of new experiences and new insights that would rise up out of the projects, campaigns, and movements starting to think of themselves as part of something larger and showing solidarity. So you work with some others and you try to kick off that kind of document, and you send it around to a few more folks and then more. And if you do that, well, then you might wind up with the 20 Theses for Liberation project that at that point you might wonder, will it slowly catch on? Will it engender sufficient support and innovation to become a desirable living document, able to inspire movements and to aid moving together to become a real movement of movements? And well, that is where we are now. It is how perhaps not all the signers, but certainly some of us have gotten to this point of this meeting, and hopefully more and more people signing on.
Do you want to come in there?
Yeah, so, at this point, the document, as Michael explained, has been signed by several, quite prominent organizations. So the M25, the Academy of Democratic Modernity, which was set up by the Kurdish movement in northern Syria, the META, Center for Post-Capitalist Vision, and of course, Realutopia and Cooperation Jackson, right? All of them organizations that are quite advanced, in their pursuits. And, thankfully, their visions actually align with the thesis that are encapsulated in the document. A lot of them, they have been practicing them, putting them into action with, a degree of failure and success. And it is a good benchmark for all the organizations, to reach common grounds and start to support each other more, and also develop and learn on the thesis. So test the principles, try to apply them, see where they need refinement, maybe share disagreements. We have also invited, even detractors, if people have disagreements with them, to write, contribute to discussion. We've gotten some responses. And this discussion today is, also one of those things that we hope will happen as part of the, further discussion on the document, which would, in fact, make it a living document, right, to be amended when necessary.
You want to come in then, Bridget?
Okay, so can people hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. I was just going to talk a bit about what we hope to achieve from the 20 thesis document. And maybe just to start by mentioning what we hope won't, what we hope 20 thesis won't be. And that is that it's just another document or another declaration that's signed by a lot of people, and then it just disappears without trace and without achieving anything without achieving anything. Now, that might be what happens anyway, but that's not what we're hoping will happen. What we hope will happen with 20 Theses is that it will be a process. And by that, I mean that it will be a living document that will serve as a starting point or a guide that activists can refine and improve upon, and that can be used as a unifying force for the left and used as a way to create a movement of movements. That's a movement made up of all the progressive programs and campaigns that are fighting for radical change in our institutions, in our economy, our polity, change in how we act towards our environment, change in our social relations, whether that's relations in our families or communities, or between cultures, race, gender, sexuality, all of that. So that wide spectrum of spheres that make up human life on Earth. That's really what a movement of movements would be like, uniting all of that under a common vision. And that's a big, I suppose, a big task, but why is it important to try and unify all of that activism? I think for obvious reasons. All of these different movements, all of these different programs and campaigns, what they're trying to do is achieve a better world where we're not under constant threat of nuclear annihilation or ecological breakdown or fascism or the endless suffering that we endure because of social and economic inequalities that are created by capitalism. And the reality is that we can't overcome change of that kind of magnitude by working in isolation on separate programs. We can only achieve that kind of change and win the better world that we're looking for by coming together and creating a mass social movement. In other words, a movement of movements. If we don't unite in that scale, okay, we can achieve small changes or even sometimes more significant changes, but ultimately we can't and we won't achieve the revolutionary change that we're looking for, and really nothing less than revolutionary change is needed at this point. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this task of trying to create a movement of movements might be the most important thing that we could be doing right now. It's not a new idea, but it's certainly an elusive one, and it's never really happened on the scale that we need it to happen. And I don't know how we overcome the impasse, but the 20 Thesis document is an attempt to do that. Our hope for 20 Thesis then is that we get thousands or hundreds of thousands, even millions of signers, both individuals and organizations from across the globe. But getting those signers is just the first step. We then also hope that 20 Thesis will be a catalyst for engagement among all those signers to begin conversations that could arrive at a shared vision, one that doesn't mean signers have to put aside or compromise their own agendas, their own areas of interest. We want 20 Thesis to be used to build trust in this process of engagement. We want to use 20 Thesis to build trust among the signers, and also that we can work together to reach this shared understanding that's bigger than any of our individual efforts or areas of interest. We want to use 20 Thesis to help us all believe that success for one of us means success for all of us, and that winning is possible. And I don't think anybody has to agree with every single word in every single one of the 20 Theses that's there to be able to sign up to it at this stage and to engage in this process the 20 Theses offers, which is a process of creating that movement of movements, that unified vision for the left. There will be opportunities to refine and improve upon what's in the document itself over time, but as it stands right now, I do believe that it's adequate for beginning this process of engagement. And that's, I suppose, in essence, what we hope the 20 Theses document will achieve.
Thanks, Bridget. I wonder if you could just speak to how the 20 Thesis would fit into a global context, so that in different places, you might need to apply the 20 Thesis slightly differently, or different emphasis, or could any of you just maybe talk about that? Michael?
Yeah, well, we have to keep in mind that there's 20 theses, and over time they change. Why do they change over time? Because we learn that they're not as good as they ought to be. That in some particular places, changing times, changing lessons from different movements, they get adaptations. But then the second kind of change that Fintan is addressing is that in different countries with different conditions and facing different problems, there'll be different prioritizations. There'll be different methods chosen. The trick of the 20 Theses was to try, don't know how well it's done it, but to try to, there are 7 of them that are about vision and 13 of them that are about strategy. Well, the 13 about strategy, every place is different. So the idea was to try and propose underlying concepts, underlying agreements, which then birth in practice very specific strategies in different countries and different times. And hopefully those underlying things are the things that people eventually can agree on. Same thing with the visionary part. And that if we could agree on those underlying essential factors, if you will, or elements, then there could be solidarity from country to country, even when they're facing different situations, because they know they're part of one big project. So that's, I think, the hope. And then the hope is that people will actually sign. And that might be the hardest step. And then having signed, we'll actually promote it. And maybe we can talk a little bit about what the impediments are to people. After all, it's an individual step ultimately to people actually deciding, okay, I'm going to sign on to this thing, or I'm going to urge my organization to, or I've signed on and I'm going to urge my friend to. What will allow people to do that or prevent people from doing that? That's what's going to govern whether or not this is a success. Your sound is off, Fenton.
Yeah, Matt, it's-
Erska's hands up.
Yeah, I'm just going to go to Matt first and then come back to Erska. If you could just talk about maybe how your experience maybe of applying the principles of the 20 thesis in organizations and in your work.
Yeah, okay. So maybe the best example would be something that's already happened actually before 20 thesis came about, you know. So I'm part of several groups, you know. One of them is Initiative for Citywide Assembly, Initiativa Mestni Zbor, active locally here in the city where I live, in Maribor, Slovenia. And you know, like the thing we do is we try to organize, you know, for more democracy, like direct democracy of citizens. So, you know, when we started out, you know, we kind of tried to organize ourselves in a way, you know, that's largely compatible with the principles that the thesis now outline, you know. So one was we wanted a non-hierarchical organization, you know, we wanted to be prefigurative, you know, so we wanted to have an organization that would actually embody the principles already, right? So we, you know, basically we took what would now be, you know, like this is about build empowerment, not hierarchy, or promote participatory decision making. And we and part of that is also, you know, try to share the empowering work, you know, so break up the usual corporate division of labor, you know, when you have like a president and the media person and I don't know, you know, professional moderator or whatever you have. And in our group, you know, we identified, you know, like tasks which would give undue influence to members, right? So since most of our work is basically, you know, putting pressure on the politicians, but through organizing citizens' assemblies in our city, we figured, you know, the things that would give a person power in our organization would be, you know, if they were chairing meetings, first of the organization, but also meetings of the assemblies, you know, so if they were the contact person to, you know, to speak to the media, or if they were constantly, you know, like going to negotiate, I don't know, with municipal officials or somewhere at the Ministry for Local Self-Government or whoever we wanted to pressure, you know, because we felt that in time, those contacts or those activities, you know, would make that person dominant in the group and could deform the group away from what we wanted, you know, which was egalitarian, non-hierarchical organizing, you know. So how we solved it was that we basically made sure, you know, that we share these activities. So it's not that everyone has to do each of them, right? But that it rotates, you know. So, but also we wanted to implement some other aspects of the thesis, you know. So it's we also wanted to make sure, you know, that we have gender parity, you know. So we made sure that not only were we sharing these tasks, you know, but they were also shared between the sexes, right? And so, as I said, this has been done years ago because I've been following these principles for a while, you know, and then turned out, you know, during intervening years that it proved quite fruitful. You know, the group was quite stable. It's now 10 years plus since we started, and the group remained cohesive. It worked. We didn't develop this, you know, hierarchy. It didn't deform, and it had also other useful properties. You know, it turns out actually when you're fighting with someone who has access, like the municipality, who has access to a lot of access to the media, you know, and a lot of media power, it's really hard to attack you if there isn't a face for them to attack, right? There's no identifiable leader or prominent person in organization. So they were really ill-equipped to try to discredit us, and the attempts were made, right? Not only through media discreditation, also through attempts at bribery and that kind of stuff, you know. So it turned out, you know, that these principles actually, when applied, you know, they were quite useful. to sustain over a longer term, right?
Thanks. Urshka, do you want to comment?
Yes, hello. Thank you. If I am too quick with questions, I apologize if you wanted to, but it came to my mind something. Oh, okay. So I wanted to congratulate you on the 20 theses, because I think they are extremely important, and I also believe it's extremely important that this becomes an international movement. But what I keep thinking, and this is just me thinking aloud, and it's also a question for every one of us. Even with this thesis, I know that among signatories, there are many different organizations and individuals, but I keep thinking that there is a difference in addressing people who are involved in movements that are working within the established form of democracy. For example, if they are working, I'm here mostly, I mean the American leftist movement, who is mostly focused on the elections, electoral politics. And I was wondering if it is the idea addressing those people, or is the idea addressing mostly people and organizations and collectives who are building at the moment as we speak alternative parallel structures and institutions? Because I think there is a difference in addressing them, and it might not work addressing them both. I think it depends on in which part of the world are you. But for example, here I'm also from Slovenia. I think that the leftist movement that works within the parliamentary politics is a completely different one that works outside it. So you wouldn't attract the same people. So if there would be like a clearer direction, you would get more people from that part of the movement to join. Yeah, but it doesn't, at least here, it wouldn't work for both. It doesn't work for both. It would have to be like a clearer structure of who we want to address with the 20 theses. As I said, I'm just thinking out loud, but this is what came to my mind.
Thanks, Urshka. Does anybody want to comment on that? Answer that?
Yeah. I can go, being in Slovenia. Yeah, I mean, as Michael said previously, the principles, apply for either group, so when we have principles that deal with the electoral process also, it kind of outlines, how you should approach this, and it's kind of opportunistically, right? If there's something to be gained, you engage with it. If it's not, you don't, right? And, when you mentioned the American movements, because of the electoral system they have, basically the parties there are, self-contained, almost unbeatable structures, so there's different logic of operating than, for example, in Slovenia, when we have multi-party election, it's proportional voting. So you can get new people, enthused with the new ideas, and they have a good chance of actually making it into the institution, even if, tons of people don't engage to support them, right? So that informs the tactical decisions, I guess, of organizations. And also, the same goes, about tactical support. Between organizations, I think, the ones who try to build like radical new alternatives, and the ones that are trying to slightly modify the existing system from within, because here we don't have any that are trying to radically change the existing system from within. So, when you think you can benefit something, to advance the cause, you do support them, and when not, you just do your thing, it's don't fight against them, but do your thing.
Bridget?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts on following what Urshka said. I think from my part of the world anyway, the difference there would be between groups that are sort of say more conservative and groups that are more radical in the kind of change that they're trying to promote. So maybe groups that are working on, sorry, my window cleaner's just here now, so you might see them sort of in the background. But so you might see groups that are campaigning for a very modest reform, and maybe that's all they want to do, and they're not really about trying to change the system or go down that road. Then there are other groups that are campaigning for something that's more of a radical change in the system, and to kind of undermine the system and eventually replace it. So there's the kind of two ends of the spectrum, and then everything in between. But I even find it difficult going back a step further from that. How do you even get any of these groups that are in the left activist space to work together? That's just such a difficult thing to try and achieve. Everybody who's working in their own areas is very focused on that. It's probably because it's taken up a lot of their resources, but when you try to get people to work together across these different campaigns, even if it's in something that's common, that could benefit both, that would very much fit in with the values and the goals of both, it's almost impossible to get people to work together. And there was an example that I experimented with last year, and it sort of just ended the experiment because it wasn't quite working. But within Collaboration for Change, which is a network that we've set up in Ireland that is trying to pull together, trying to do exactly what 20 Theses is trying to do, bring together left activists to work under sort of a common vision. And we kind of came up with this campaign that would be about divesting, getting councils, say local authorities, local councils, to divest from any investment in fossil fuel industry or extractive industries, and to instead invest in the local region. And that was something that was a goal that could speak to a lot of different campaigns that were happening. And we did pull together some people that came together from these different groups, and we had a few meetings. But honestly, it didn't seem to take off. It was just so difficult to get them to work together. And I think it's almost like a completely new mindset for people to work together on things that are completely outside of the particular area of interest that they're working on. So that's trying to answer what you're saying there, Urška. You do have more or less radical groups, but you also have within the whole spectrum just that concept of trying to get people to work together under a common vision. I think that's really difficult.
Michael, do you want to come in now?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question of the people who haven't spoken, if they're willing to respond. It's basically, if you've signed, why? And if you haven't signed, was there an obstacle? And if you have signed, are you inclined to try and get others to sign and to, spread the idea? That's where the crux of the thing is. And so how about if people, I hope, would be willing to speak on that? You're in a big majority, gargantuan, if you haven't signed, so you don't have to feel the slightest bit bad about it. The question is, we need to try and understand why people don't sign, and why people who do sign then forget about it and don't think that there's any point in trying to get others involved. So maybe some people would be willing to chat about their own reactions. Anybody?
Well, I could try to answer actually both questions. Well, the first thing I thought is kind of connected, since I'm from now in Germany, in Europe, we are thought to think of it's a mechanical issue. I was immediately thinking of data safety and will my name appear on your website when I sign up. That's just the first thing that came up through my head. It's not a big issue. I just wanted to mention it. The real question which I actually wanted to ask here is, if I sign, I would at least need to think to that the movement, the idea, which I find perfect as a unifying movement, has a chance of succeeding. So that would be my biggest doubt. Why is it not a simple wish list like many others? And isn't it in some way competition to other organizations which are actually trying to do the same thing, like the Progressive International, for already some time? So I would have to have at least some hope of investing time and effort into this has some chances of success.
Fair enough.
Urška?
Yeah, so I agree with Zoran, and at the same time, I think I already mentioned that is so yeah, people don't know why they should sign it. I mean, they can agree, they can read it and agree, but they don't know why they should sign it. What does it mean if I sign this? What does it mean?
Yeah.
You know, how will this go further, and what does it mean if I sign it? And also, I think one of the problems is that just in general, people are not used to reading anymore, bigger text. And they just, I know that I have sent the thesis to other people, and then I've reminded them, oh, have you signed it? Have you read it? And then I was my colleagues at work, and they were, no, I haven't read it yet. I haven't read it. And at the end, I think they just signed it because of me. And then they never read it because it's, for most people, it's too long. So I think it's the length is okay, but for now, for most people who are not reading anymore, it's too long. I'm not saying it should be short, not at all, but I think this is one of the problems. So this that people don't read, and the second, they don't know if they sign, what does that mean at all? Why, you know, I think these are the reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, the length might be an issue, you know, to kind of spread very widely. I you know, an anecdote, you know, I sent it to my sister, you know, and like 2 weeks later I asked, and she said, oh, I've just gotten to the 7th, you know, principal thesis. I read it in the end, you know, until now she still hadn't signed it, you know, so that's it is an issue, you know, but it's not such a long document, you know, if you think it's important. You know, as Zoran said, you know, if you know where it's going and what's going to be done with it, you know, you probably have more motivation to do it. But there is also, you know, the concern we had, you know, not to kind of build a separate platform to already existing ones, right? So you probably can see, you know, that we are not like join our organization, you know, to fight for the 20 thesis. You know, you mentioned Progressive International, you know, and they're one of the signers, you know, so we didn't want to create parallel structures to those who already existed. You know, we wanted the already existing structures, you know, to, you know, take a look at this, you know, absorb it, have internal discussion, you know, see what lessons can you gain from them, you know, and use it as a basis to then connect more deeply or at all, you know, with other organizations. So it was never meant, you know, we will get, I don't know, you know, 100,000 signatures and then send it to someone, you know, demanding X, you know, that was never the idea behind it, you know. What we wanted was that it would, you know, slowly percolate through the left scene, I guess, internationally, you know, that people would see it, you know, that it's wise, that maybe, you know, a lot of these principles are already being enacted or, you know, fought for by the already existing organizations, you know, and think, you know, how to improve the aspects that maybe they're not doing, you know, and also on these basics, you know, find the organizations who are also agreeing with these principles and connect with them more deeply, you know. So that was basically the idea, right? And we also decided we would play it by ear a little, you know, see what the responses are. see what the organizations would then want to do with it, and try to facilitate some process, that would be in line with the wishes of the co-signers, co-hosts, other organizations that would take it up, right? So that's why it wasn't, all laid out at the beginning.
Bridget, did you want to come in?
I think Matisse was covering some of the stuff I was going to say, but maybe just that idea that picking up the Progressive International or other organizations that are trying to do something similar. I don't think this is the intention is to usurp anything that anybody's doing or to duplicate anything anybody's doing already. And it certainly doesn't cancel out their work or try to compete with them, and it's meant to sort of galvanize and complement, and try to put on the agenda that we do need to work together across campaigns, across movements, that we do need to find common ground that we can get behind and try to push forward on, because honestly it does feel like there's a lot of activity. People are really working hard. People are using all their resources, all their time. We're sort of exhausted. People, left activists, but it feels like we're just not. There isn't that critical mass of unity that is actually given us some kind of tipping point of change. That just doesn't seem to be happening. In my view, anyway. I don't know, others maybe feel differently, but there's a lot out there. There's a lot of there's plenty of things that you could get involved in, but why is it that we're almost like dividing up into smaller and smaller units and working on smaller and smaller issues rather than trying to see a bigger picture and really say, right, what we're trying to do is win a better world. We're not going to do that if we're all divided into different pieces. So this 20 Theses is not about trying to win ground over from somebody else. It's trying to galvanize everybody that's already in those spaces and saying, actually, we're all connected here. We can all try to achieve by working on what we're doing, but being conscious of some kind of common vision, that we're actually achieving something that has a greater goal than just the goals that we have individually. I don't know if that makes any sense, but to me, that's what the 20 Theses is trying to do.
Did anybody else have any questions or any criticisms? Alexandria, do you want to come in?
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm with my camera off because I'm somewhere with weak internet. But I just wanted to add, in addition to what's been said about some experiences that I've had in sharing the 20 Theses around, when people get back to me either positively, negatively, or through ignoring it. And to kind of add on what's been said already, much of which I agree with. I think that another aspect of it that I've realized it could be important for is actually as an outreach tool, not just to create left unity among existing people who already identify as progressive or left or radical, but as a way to speak to a lot of people about what do you mean when you say you're progressive or you're left, or that you want to create a non-hierarchical liberatory organization to do XYZ in your community. And I think we can touch on the length of it and maybe even the format. Maybe long form text is not a way to reach lots of people these days. But what I see as a really great way that people can engage with this right away is to use it and then adapt it to their context, and maybe even write it in a much plainer, shorter format, or make art or video out of it, in order to bring a whole lot of people who share a lot of these values and see the 20 Theses as expressing a whole lot of common sense that would make their organizing in maybe their work or other aspects of their life a whole lot better. But they just don't really, they don't share the same language as a lot of us left organizers. And I recently had an experience where a young person came to me and said, hey, I kind of like what you talk about sometimes. I want to learn about politics and what's going on in the world. Where should I start? And I realized that it kind of floored me, where I was like, oh, where do I even start? I don't want to overwhelm this person, send them a huge list of articles and texts and have them never talk to me again. But I also don't want to, just send them some surface level thing and not have them engage. And I think that we could use more tools like the 20 Theses that are comprehensive, and then we can adapt to our own situation, instead of just saying, well, first you got to read Kropotkin, and then you got to read Bookchin and Marx, and whoever, take your flavor. And at the same time, a lot of left organizations, I think, could benefit in their outreach endeavors, as well as working together in the inter-left scene, in just having a living document that expresses the basic shared liberatory aims that most folks on the left already share. And again, I know the 20 Theses is already long. It's not accessible for many people to read or enjoyable. And I think that in itself is an opportunity to, just work with the title of each thesis and make an adaptation of how you might present that differently. So this thing definitely needs to morph into a lot of different presentations, but to me, that's another area that I see it can be immediately beneficial, as just a way for us to distill decades and even centuries of progressive thought into something that reaches people now.
Thanks. Urshka, do you want to come in there?
Yes, so I was thinking that maybe it could work, or it could be a good idea to ask the people who have signed it, or the organizations who have signed the 20 Theses, to give an example of what they are doing in this direction under like each of the theses, or those of the theses that they that they feel most close to. And it could be, so you could click on let's say the thesis 17. I'm not sure now what it is, and then you would another category would open when you would have examples of those who have signed what they are doing in this direction. This could maybe give other people ideas, and they see, oh, I am also doing something similar. Let's, maybe we can connect, or give them the idea what they could do in their country, their environment, local community, and so on. Maybe just an idea.
Zoran, sorry, do you want to come in?
I just wanted to agree with Urshka right here, saying that I understand what the point was, to create sort of a definition that others can rally around. But in that case, what I'm missing are action items. So what does it has been mentioned before, what does it mean signing? If I'm an organization, does it mean I need to at least put it up on my webpage, or stick strictly to it? Or do we just agree that we want a better future, which of course everybody will sign? So then I'm missing action items.
Michael, you were not in there. Do you want to come in?
Well, what does it mean to sign? I think that's the exact same question as what does it mean to be against the war, against racism, for anything. It means it's the way you think, and it's the way you feel, and perhaps you feel it's strong enough to act on it. So the premise of this thing is that it's important to have sufficient shared values, vision, strategy to provide an umbrella that makes people feel like they're a part of one larger thing. If one doesn't feel that's a valuable step toward a movement of movements, there's no point in signing, there's no point in relating to it. There's no point in thinking about it. It's not worth the time or the energy. I think that's, we should admit that. But if we think that that is important, if we think that that is not only important, but is probably a necessary step, without it, we can't generate that kind of solidarity and that kind of mutual aid, then I think, signing it and acting on signing it, getting others involved, trying to make it better, et cetera, it's all makes sense. And then why wouldn't you do it? Well, it was Zoran's original question. It could still be the case that you think it would be great if it happened, but what's the likelihood that it will happen? I mean, is it really going to succeed? And I don't think there's much of an answer to that, except something like, well, I'll use something from sports. There's there's a hockey player who was called the Great One. His name was Wayne Gretzky. He was, he was to hockey what, I don't know, Chomsky is to thought. The GOAT, they call it, the greatest of all time. And he used to say, you miss every shot that you don't take. If arriving at a shared vision and strategy is necessary, then you have to take the shot. It doesn't matter whether you are sure it's going to hit or you're not sure it's going to hit, because if you don't take it, it's not hitting. So I would say that. As to the too long thing, I understand the sentiment. I understand, the need to have as many words as you need, but not one word more. And maybe we haven't achieved that. But I suspect in this case, as many words as you need and not one more is still quite a few. I mean, it's incredibly succinct right now, I think. And I think we have to battle against this. I don't think we're going to win a new society, build a new world, if people rule out participating because it's going to take more than, they're used to spending not reading anything, or reading only tweets, or reading only short. Some things are going to have to change from what's comfortable now. It's not going to be comfortable. So I think that's something we just have to deal with. If Matisse, if your sister says she doesn't want to read, or she can't read it, or it's too long, or somebody says that, or any of us, it comes back then to the question, is this necessary to win? If it's necessary to win, the option to not do it because it's too long doesn't exist. We should make it as short as we can, but you just have to do certain things. So the feeling behind 20 Theses, at least for some of us, is that we're not going to win without unity, without mutual aid, without a movement of movements. And this is an attempt, it's a shot at that. If it doesn't work, we just have to come back and take another shot. If it does work, great.
Did that address your question, Zoran, or?
Oh, yes. I mean, it is definitely not a yes or no question. So it's all about the debate. So yes, thank you.
We have a question here in the chat. Jeffrey's asked, how do you define win, Michael?
Well, I think the 20 Theses defines it. That is, the first 7 of them is about what a new society would involve, would characterize, what would be the essential features of it. Winning ultimately is that winning a higher minimum wage is winning a higher minimum wage. Winning an end to a war is winning an end to a war. Winning a whole new society is winning a new set of institutions that have the different properties that you desire. So when I talk about winning, if I'm talking about a particular campaign, that's what I'm talking about. But in the 20 Theses, if I talk about winning, I'm talking about winning a new society, winning a new way of organizing life, winning an end to all the stuff that threatens survival or diminishes lives. That's what it means to me.
Alexandra?
Thanks. I had a question, but I'll just quickly add to Michael's answer of the previous question. I agree. I think that's like what winning looks like in a sense of far down the road, like achieving the utopia that can never be achieved, but can always be pursued and certainly get a lot better than it is right now. But I also think in addition to that, winning is the process of people coming together collectively, doing strategic organizing to achieve goals that are like fundamental system changing goals. So it's also that inciting that process to me for the 20 thesis is winning, because I think we'll, as soon as even if we were to reach something that looked like what is outlined at the beginning of the 20 thesis, I think if this project is working, by the time we would get there, it would have changed and we would actually have even further and better things to be working towards. So I think the process is also winning in itself. But I wanted to ask, I guess, a little bit of follow-up on Zoran's question and maybe on others' comments as well. What I'm hearing about, okay, even if I sign, then what do I do with it? Is a really good question. And on the website for Liberation, I know there's already a few suggestions of just urging people to interact and engage with the 20 thesis, which is pretty broad. And I'm wondering, should there be maybe, for the organizers of this project and those who want to promote it, should there be maybe more specific asks laid out? I think the original goal of the organizers was, look, engage with this however you want, write a response, have an event within your organization, or like use it to apply to your organization. There could be many ways to act after signing, but maybe we need to, maybe it's too open-ended. And I think people are just not used to that these days. We're all used to being told what to do all the time. So do you all think it would be beneficial, in addition to how the project is being presented now, to maybe, at the risk of adding more words onto the website, but outline in more detail possible next steps, just to give people, a very easy and accessible pathway to start engaging and start imagining their own further ways to engage?
Does anyone want to respond directly to that, or Bridget, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I'll just come in on that, because what I was going to say was sort of related to that as well. When I gave my introduction and what we were hoping that this would be, one of the things I said was that we were hoping that it wouldn't be just a document that people signed, because there's a lot of that kind of thing around. People saying things all the time, and then we just forget about it. This is, it's not just a document, it's a process. So it's a project that's starting with having the document and starting with having signers, and then it's up to either a core group of people who want to focus on it, or up to anybody who signed it to get involved in that, to say, okay, here's how the process is going to work. And I think Alexandria's suggestion there for having more specific ideas about actions that we can take forward, that could be a good way to start it, because we have left it a bit open-ended the way it is at the minute. But the idea was that there would be engagement, that we would start this as a process. So this event, for example, is part of that. It's getting us thinking about it. It's getting us to talk about it. If we didn't have this event, we wouldn't be thinking about it today, right? So more of this kind of thing. Maybe somebody had suggested, I think it was Urshka, and maybe Zoran, but that idea of having examples of what is happening under each of the theses. So if there are groups already working on some of these things, or we have examples of how some of these theses have been implemented already, then that could be really useful for people to see that, oh, actually, what I'm involved in already is already doing some of this, or I can see how what I'm involved in already could do a bit more and we would actually be achieving some other theses. So I think that could be a really good way to begin that process, or to be part of that process. and maybe having some of those more creative ways to present the content as well. So we have it in text form. Maybe there's some artistic people that could produce some graphics along with that, that kind of thing, or packaging it into smaller pieces that go out at different times, and maybe get somebody's attention and bring them to the theses and think, okay, I'll sign that. But I do think having a plan now for this process that has some steps and some direct actions, I think that would be really useful.
Yes, I'd like to say something also. I agree with what Alexandria and Bridget said, that we need easier ways for people to start joining and take a next step. Because whenever you, as much as the 20 theses can mean to a person and help them understand themselves, they realize that when they take that step, they're probably moving away from the social context in which they live, and therefore they may be even giving up something to try to get something better. But for any person who moves towards the left, they have to deal with the fact that all the social thing around them in the media do not do that. So they have to deal with the fact that they can threaten some of their relationships and connections. And the idea of having the new connections readily available, I think would help very much with that.
Lonnie, you had a comment?
Yeah, yeah. So in addition to kind of echoing what Alexandria said about using it for, I guess maybe to show people what it could mean to be in a movement on the left, because I think it's easy for a lot of us to forget just how many people there are that are quite apolitical now, in the sense of maybe not even knowing what it means to be part of the left, or even sometimes the difference between left and right. But in addition to that, I had written before as an endorsement that I see it kind of, the 20 Theses as kind of a compass. And by that, I mean, it's something that I think that we should keep with us and engage regularly, in the sense that, so if within an organization, and I think it could be pitched this way to organizations, it could be pitched this way to the entire movement, is that it's something that you would want to engage with on a regular basis for reflection, to see how well you're doing. And then also it can be something that you reference back to when there's disputes, either within an organization or among different organizations that are trying to work together, that it can be something that is looked back on to help maybe settle disagreements or disputes or whatnot, or just even a reference to cite in times of confusion or even despair. To look at it as a compass, I think is a helpful way to give it life, but to make sure that that it's engaged with, not just the one time that people see it, sign it, and then don't think about it again.
Thanks, Lonnie. Does anybody have any response to Joel's question, which was kind of about support for people who will be making steps, maybe in their organizations or individually, around the 20 Theses?
It's hard to see, the support that would happen would be, to get to know organizations who have actually implemented some of it, so the one suggested solution about practical examples, I think would be some way to go to, but also, you know, it's I think it's kind of this expectation that, you know, I don't know, signing this thesis will already achieve something, you know, but it won't, you know. It's even if we got everyone to sign on to them, you know, that by itself would mean nothing, you know. You still have to, you know, go and implement the things that are, you know, implied in the thesis into the organizations we actually are engaged in, you know. And this and, you know, at least in my experience, you know, a very large majority of organizations, you know, that would consider themselves leftist, you know, are not organized along these principles, right? Even some of the signers, you know, actually don't apply to all of them, you know. And I think if you read them, you know, and you feel that this is a good way, you know, to go, you know, it should be, you know, conversations should be started, and they won't be immediate, you know. You're going to achieve nothing in a week, you know. So we expect it to be a process, you know, that will hopefully, you know, result in changes in already existing, or, you know, that will kind of inform the organizations, new organizations that they start, you know. I don't know. I remember this kind of influence, you know, when I was starting out in the activist way, you know. So you know, I picked up the lessons, you know, and then try to implement them in organization. I was either joining or starting or whatever, you know. And we think, you know, this could work the same way, you know. Of course, the impact would be swiftest if the, you know, big already existing umbrella organizations would, you know, immediately start, you know, soul searching, you know, seeing where they're not in line with the thesis, you know, which they, you know, some of them signed it, you know, and then correct, you know. But it's a process that takes time, you know. Some of the problems or the principles, you know, practical solutions sometimes also have to be found, you know, that also work in different contexts. So I don't expect it will have like a quick, you know, effect, but hopefully it will have an effect, you know. And I think to people, you know, who are just reading them, you know, and maybe are not engaged right now or part of the organizations that already signed them, you know, the thing that, you know, such credible organizations that have signed them, you know, is like a good indication, you know, that you have some confidence, you know, that this is not some, you know, some, I don't know, flimsy fantasy, you know, that there are serious organizations that have been around that are doing good work. They think these are good principles, you know, to organize around. But then, you know, you still have to go, you know, you have to talk to other people in your group and convince them of the value and find actually how to implement them, you know.
Lonnie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question for either Bridget, Matitz, or Michael. In the authorship of a document like this, I'm curious as to if there's any type of historical comparison to other documents, you know, from before that might have had the same types of intentions, or at least similar intentions, and then maybe a slight comparison, but then a reflection on what seemed to be either successful, but mostly what were the failures of those types of documents, and how would this differ, especially in the idea of the authorship, what was in mind as to avoid the failures of documents that might have been like this before.
Michael, do you want to come in there?
Okay, yeah. Well, at an earlier time, I was involved with, I actually wrote something called We Stand, and it was We Stand for this, that, and the other thing. It wasn't very long. It was very punchy, and it got about 120,000 signatures in a week and a half. It also accomplished virtually nothing. So that I think, and so that is what you're asking. Well, what's the difference? And the difference is, I hate to put it this way, but it's true. It was appealing, but it didn't go far enough. It was like, well, we're all against war and we're all against poverty and we're all against racism and so on, but it didn't have anything really positive or really strategic. And the difference with this one is trying to provide enough more so that it's a foundation for going forward as compared to just a statement of unity. But I just wanted to say a bit about something that came before. People are asking, what do I do if I sign it? And what does somebody else do if they sign it? Well, it seems to me the different kinds of people that would perhaps consider signing are people who are in a political movement or an organization or a campaign, people who are radical but who are not in such a movement, people who aren't radical but are open. That's the group that Alexandria was talking about we could reach out to, and people who are involved in the system as it is and in basically ameliorating it a little bit. That last group, I don't think this is for. But the first three groups, I think what you can do is pretty clear. If you're in an organization, a group, or a campaign, and you sign it because you believe it's a valuable project to undertake, then the next thing to do is to work in that organization to get the organization to relate. And if you're not in any such thing, you sign it, and if you want to do more, you try and get other people who you relate to and who you know. And if you're just getting attracted, I think you do whatever comes naturally. I don't think this part is rocket science. I really don't. I don't mean to be disparaging, but I mean, that's what you can do. That's what a person can do. If it grows and it gets someplace, then I think what Lonnie was talking about, what a number of people have been talking about, arises as possibilities, and looking at an organization in terms of fulfilling, acting on these kinds of views, that becomes real. But the thing that I don't think we should confuse is this is not an organization, right? We're not saying sign on and join the organization X. This is a document, a living document, hopefully meant to impact existing organizations and campaigns and movements and independent radicals. But you're not joining something new. You hopefully would be transforming what exists a little bit. That's, I think, the way it can go forward.
Alexandria?
I originally wanted to add on a little bit to what Matit said about, his experience in applying frameworks like this from other sources to his organizing. But I think this same point also answers Lonnie's question about why is this document different? So yes, I 100% agree with what Matit is saying. It's supposed to be for all of us and anyone who wants to use as a guide and to help us along our organizing. But in addition, so say, I sign it, I like this, I want to use this for my own organizing, and I see all of you here, and if you've all signed, I see maybe you feel the same. That can engender some kind of solidarity and trust between us. And you can expand that at the organizational level, where, like we've talked about, we have these quite serious organizations who have signed showing they think it's a good idea. Not all of them have yet, or maybe even feel it's possible and practical to deeply implement these principles yet. But imagine if they started to do that. And imagine if other organizations were to sign and it grows and grows, that not only achieves lots of names on a list, but if we're all interacting with it and really internalizing these principles and acting on them, that in itself creates trust and solidarity and collective power, because we see each other operating that way and we start to recognize it amongst each other. And it makes us all stronger by doing that. And I think why this document is different than lots of other documents who've tried to do similar things is that in the document itself, it says, this is not an end in itself for everyone to accept or reject. This is an invitation to keep going and build upon. So this document is hopefully not in its final format. It's something that can continue to be adapted and changed. And I think it might even be in the conclusion where it states that the original signatories and co-authors hope that even if this document in 5 years looks totally different, hopefully in a good way, that actually is a win from the standpoint of those who initiated it, as long as it's a product of everyone organizing together along things that they feel they can share, shared vision and strategy for collective action. So to me, it does make it a little different in that this is not a document which is, okay, here it is, and now it has to apply forever. It's a process. This document is just how we're starting it. But the real point of it is the process. It's the interaction, the connections, and the solidarity, and serious strategic collective action that's needed if we're going to change anything, which we need to do real soon. So that's my perspective on why it's different.
Thanks, Alexandra. Anybody else have a comment? Bridget?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the Collaboration for Change network that I talked about earlier that I'm still involved in, we created a declaration. We did that through a collaborative process with a whole range of activists. And the idea was, it was kind of modeled on We Stand and also the LEAP manifesto in Canada, to have that kind of declaration for Ireland and to get people behind that. And hasn't been that hugely successful. And I think what we've learned from that, and also this is running in parallel to 20 Theses now, is that whole notion of it not being that static thing that just sits there and people sign it and walk away from it, but being something that's really alive, that can be revised and changed, but also that we have a process that comes out of it. So 20 Theses is going to be is a process. It's not just the document. It is going to have actions. We are going to see how we keep it in the minds of people and how we integrate those values into the activism that we're all involved in and get more and more people to see that. But say, for example, from Collaboration for Change and the declaration that we did there, Collaboration for Change has signed the 20 Theses document, and its own declaration is very much aligned to what's in 20 Theses. We've organized ourselves and how we conduct the group along that non-hierarchical approach, and we're now at the stage where we're getting involved in a process as well, that behind that process and forming that process is our declaration. But we're going to have events, I suppose, that have been inspired by the whole Brexit issue, which is a big thing that happened in Britain, but it also kind of interferes with Ireland. But we're seeing that is an opportunity to talk about Irish unity and trying to remove partition within Ireland. And we're using the declaration, and the hope is that we can organise a number of events that will start to bring people together under a conversation that's going to talk about Irish unity, but in a way that's not going to be making an assumption that we could have Irish unity and it's going to be a 32 county Ireland that is neoliberal, and just making that assumption, but that we could have a 32 county Ireland that could be a very different kind of society. So the declaration is a kind of a backdrop to that, and so we're starting a process now in Collaboration for Change, and I think that maybe that'll work, maybe that won't work, but I think that does bring the declaration to life. And I see the 20 Theses document is working as a document that complements that work we're trying to do here, that runs in parallel to it, but that it is also going to be a process. And so it won't be something that just sits there. Well, that's the hope anyway, that sits there and is gathering dust on a shelf, a virtual shelf.
Thanks, Bridget. We've got about 10 minutes left. I think we need to kind of wrap up. Do any of the original authors have any comments? Or are there any questions before we finish up? Michael, do you want to finish up? We need to kind of wrap up. We've been on this now nearly an hour and 20 minutes. So, Bridget, do you want to sum up?
I'll just maybe just I mean, Michael might have some final words and Matisse as well, but just to say that that idea about having examples that go alongside the 20 theses, I think that could be really useful. And I think we'll maybe take that back and see how we can start filling that out. Maybe we'll ask yourselves as well and ask the signers if they've got ideas that they could contribute to that. But I think that could be a good practical next step. And we'll also maybe think about that process that we're going to, that we want this document to follow, and think about practical next steps for everybody who has signed and where we could take this next.
Did you want to join in the summing up?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one thing, because we talked about, movements and, like activist groups or that kind of stuff, but these principles can be applied, in a workplace also, like, co-ops can apply many of these principles internally. They can't apply all of them, you can't just divorce yourself from the market economy because there isn't, but you can, carve out little niches. And when wherever you have democratic decision-making structures that co-ops use, you can improve them, by trying to apply these principles, into the structure itself, the practices you have inside. So that may be also one avenue where these theses can be useful. And some of its lessons, can be applied.
Michael, do you have any final comments?
Honestly, I don't know. I think it's like everything else on the left. It's easy, relatively easy, to come up with ideas which, if they happen, will be great, will be wonderful. It's hard to do the things that can make an idea that would be wonderful, if it happened, happen. And it simply requires a leap. We're small still. We don't have fantastic resources. We are pressed for time. We have all sorts of responsibilities, but the reality is that an idea is nice and a practice matters and can make an idea into something that really makes a difference. And it's the little steps. It's the steps like signing, like getting other people to sign, like getting one's organization to pay attention to something, to act on something, to relate. Those are the steps that mount up into real phenomena. So insofar as you're considering signing, or you've signed and you're considering the sort of embarrassing step of trying to talk to a relative about it or a friend about it, because it can feel embarrassing, it can feel like you're from Mars or something, bringing up this stuff. It's just something that must be done, and therefore we try to do it, and that's what this is. I think it has a real shot. It has a real chance but it only has a chance if people make it happen. So I hope people will consider the site, consider interacting with what's there, read the theses if you haven't, express your differences if you have them, express your suggestions if you have them, sign and get other people to sign. That's what's needed for this thing to have some momentum.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks to everybody else who participated in the first edition of What Are You Talking About? If anybody wants any more information on the 20 theses that we were talking about today, please go to forliberation.org, where you can read the thesis. And if you have more questions, you can pose them there. You can also pose them in the Real Utopia Discord chat, and you can get the information for that at realutopia.org. Thanks again for everybody for taking part, and hopefully we'll have another Real Utopia What Are You Talking About event soon. Thanks.